They were mutilated. It's as simple as that. Mutilated beyond the point of recognition by a player playing a twisted game with a horrific agenda. The man you see in front of you has taken part in some of the most heinous crimes ever committed in American history. The man you are all looking at is H.H. Holmes. Today I'm going to teach you all about America's first serial killer, his murder castle, and some conspiracy theories that still revolve around him to this day. Holmes was basically the foundation of serial murder as we know it today. He was the first person in America to be labeled as a serial killer, and that sparked much controversy and still does. There are constantly new conspiracy theories that are surfacing or resurfacing about him. He came off as a charming man, the kind of person you may want to invite into your house when his car breaks down to use your phone, but that wasn't who he was at all. According to multiple sources, including biography.com, crimemuseum.org, NBC News, and a novel written by Harold Schechter, Holmes earned the title of America's first serial killer when he opened up his notorious murder castle in Chicago, Illinois. It was said to be lined with passageways that were hidden, chutes to dump bodies down, gas chambers, and its own crematorium in the basement. The worst thing is, that's not even the scariest part about this castle. What was scariest about his castle was what took place in the basement, and it would actually make the Grim Reaper shake. So how did Holmes become the notorious murderer that we know of today? What kinds of murderous acts did he actually commit in his castle, and what in the world does any of this have to do with Jack the Ripper? Well, let me explain. He was born under a much different name of Herman Webster Mudgett. He was born to a relatively privileged family, and according to biography.com, his father was possibly abusive. He was very interested in medicine from the beginning, and as his life progressed, he began torturing small animals, which actually is part of McDonald's triad, early signs of a serial killer. After he graduated high school, he changed his name to Henry Howard Holmes and began attending medical school. While he was in medical school, he actually began to steal cadavers to plant them as if they had come off in like some kind of accident, and he would claim the insurance policies on these cadavers. So as his life progressed, he opened up what would later become known as the Murder Castle in Chicago. He moved there after medical school and got a job at a pharmacy. He later on bought the pharmacy, the plot across the street, and had this murder castle constructed. As you can see, the basement was fit with dissecting tables, and there's hidden passages. You can see like the staircases and all that are hidden. He actually went through multiple construction companies that he would hire and fire because he didn't want anybody to know what he was constructing and where everything was hidden. So people were constantly losing their jobs and nobody knew why. So as he progressed with his business, as I guess you could call it, here's a more detailed photo, he started coming up with all these crazy rules for his guests. One of them being, even if you were a worker or a guest, you had to have an insurance policy, a life insurance policy, with him listed as the beneficiary. I don't know about you, but I would not be staying at that hotel. So when the World's Fair eventually hit Chicago, he started luring people in with the promise of cheap lodging, some women with the possibility of becoming his wife, so they can inherit all this money from him. But obviously, that's not what happened. He began killing his guests, and he would throw their bodies down the chutes. Some of them he would dissect and sell their skeletons to medical schools to turn a profit, which is quite disgusting. Because if you think about it, think about every college that could possibly still have these skeletons. It's a little disturbing. Other bodies he would actually burn in his own crematorium that he had in the basement, that he actually structured himself. So when the World's Fair left Chicago, his business, I guess you can call his business, began getting kind of on the lower side. He wasn't making as much profit from the people that he was murdering and selling their skeletons. So he went back to insurance fraud crimes with his partner, Pitzel. But during the wake of all this, he was actually going to have an insurance scheme where they were going to fake Pitzel's death, but he actually killed him and collected the insurance policy. And not only did he kill him, he killed his entire family. That's how he got caught. He got caught in Pennsylvania for murdering his own partner. While he was in prison, he later confessed to the crimes that he committed at the hotel, which raked in between the numbers of 28 to 200 victims that he confessed to. He only confessed to 28, but some of them that he confessed to were actually still alive. So it's kind of hard to believe anything that he says. But then again, he was a murderer, so what can you really believe? He may have killed even more than what we know, because there's also a popular conspiracy theory saying that he was Jack the Ripper. So if anybody's familiar with Jack the Ripper, he was a notorious serial killer that plagued the streets of London, and he killed prostitutes. Oop, sorry. How do I fix that? That's my next picture anyway. There's another conspiracy theory revolving around him also, saying that he faked his own death and that he had somebody else take his place when he was sentenced to death row. His great-great-grandson had his body exhumed to have DNA testing done to show that it actually was him in the grave. It's also funny because he decided, I don't want anybody stealing my body, let me have it encased in cement. But it was okay for him to steal other people's cadavers, which I found quite ironic. So his great-great-grandson started doing more and more digging and actually had 2 journals that were passed down through the family that had detailed descriptions in them of the murders that happened in London from Holmes himself, that he wrote about killing these different prostitutes that he came into contact with. His great-great-grandson said that everything is too coincidental and that he's absolutely convinced that H.H. Holmes was Jack the Ripper, and he is not going to stop until he can prove it. So, without a doubt, Holmes has a long history for the short life that he lived. He was a monster who never showed mercy to any of his victims, and he had an entire building constructed just so he can murder in his own house of horrors. Even after death, his name is still popular in modern-day culture and continues to spark interest with conspiracy theories that even have sparked television shows to be created about him being Jack the Ripper. Labeled as America's first serial killer, Holmes has made an impact on our culture and continues to today. He was the first one in America to make us realize that we sometimes do need to be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. The man you all see before you, Herman Webster Mudgett, born to a seemingly normal family, lived a life that nobody had ever expected him to live. He became H.H. Holmes, America's first and probably most notorious serial killer. Look around the room at each and every person. It seems like a fair amount of people, right? A decent-sized crowd. This crowd is still smaller than the number of victims that Holmes had, weighing in from anywhere between 28 to 200 people. Thank you.